Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a piece of technology that for decades was the unsung hero for countless businesses. The thing is, most people have never even heard of it. We are talking about Btrieve, the super-fast indexed file manager that was running silently under the hood of some of the most important apps in the world.
And that quote, man, that just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It wasn't flashy. It didn't have some slick user interface. It was just a silent workhorse, a foundational layer of code that simply worked. All right, let's get into it.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start by uncovering this hidden engine. Then we'll take a trip back in time to a world before SQL was king to really get why Btrieve was so vital. We'll pop the hood and see how it actually worked, discover why it was such an invisible workhorse, and then we'll wrap up by talking about its lasting, foundational legacy.
So what was Btrieve really? Well, it was created way back in 1982 by a company called Softcraft, which later got picked up by Novell. But here's the thing. It wasn't a database in the way you probably think of one today. It was a record manager, basically a supercharged file system that gave developers incredibly fast, direct access to their data.
Now, to really appreciate why Btrieve was such a big deal, you got to transport yourself back to the early 1980s. Sure, relational databases with SQL were around, but they were often these big, complicated beasts that ate up a ton of resources. For a lot of business software back then, the only things that mattered were raw speed and rock-solid reliability. They didn't need a fancy way to ask questions of their data, they just needed to grab a specific record, and they needed it like yesterday.
And this right here, this lays out the difference perfectly. With SQL, you use a query language. It's abstract. You tell the database what you want, and it figures out the best way to get it for you. Btrieve was totally different. It used a navigational API. You, the programmer, told it exactly how to find the data, step by step, record by record. Its goal wasn't fancy data relationships. It was just pure, unadulterated speed. And that made it perfect to be embedded right inside an application.
Okay, so how did a developer actually use this thing? It's not like today where you'd pop open a command line or a management studio. Oh no, this was all done in code. You were literally building the data access logic right into your application, using languages like COBOL, C, or Pascal.
And this is the absolute core concept you've got to get, the navigational API. So instead of writing a nice, clean query like select star from customers where ID equals 123, a developer was making a series of direct function calls. You'd call a function to open the file, another to point a cursor at the right spot using an index key, and then another to read the record. It was way more hands-on, a much more low-level approach to data.
And this shows that process perfectly. The workflow is so direct, so simple. You'd make a call to open the file, then another to say, hey, get me the record with this specific key. Bam, you'd get that one record back. You can change it in your program's memory and then write it back. Just 4 simple steps, executed at absolutely blinding speed.
But don't let that simplicity fool you for a second. Btrieve was incredibly sophisticated for its time. I mean, it had features that could go toe-to-toe with full-on databases. You could have multiple indexes on a single file, you had transaction controls to keep your data safe, and this was huge for networks, it had record-level locking. It even had crash recovery and journaling. So the key takeaway here is you got database-level reliability without all the heavy overhead of a traditional database system.
All right, so let's talk about the real world. Because all this tech is neat, but it doesn't mean a thing if it isn't solving actual problems. And Btrieve solved a massive one, getting insane performance out of the pretty modest hardware people had back in the day.
We're talking thousands of transactions a second. And this wasn't happening on some giant mainframe in a climate-controlled room. This was on the PCs and small servers that were running in offices and retail stores all over the place. That level of performance was its absolute killer feature. It's the reason it got so huge, especially since it worked so well with Novell NetWare, which was the networking system back then.
And because it was so fast, Btrieve became the secret engine inside so many applications you might have used and never, ever known it. You know, legendary software like Peachtree accounting, tons of point-of-sale terminals in stores, complex inventory systems in warehouses. Btrieve was the invisible, reliable heart beating inside all of them. All this critical data lived inside these simple, compact files with a .btr extension on the end. A whole company's accounting data could just be sitting in a handful of these files on a server. It was just so deeply embedded, so efficient, and for the businesses that depended on it, It was completely and totally dependable. So, where does all of this leave Btrieve today? I mean, yeah, SQL-based systems obviously became the standard for just about everything, but the influence of Btrieve and the lessons it taught are actually still incredibly relevant.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective. It shows up in '82, it hits its absolute peak right around 1990. It was basically the default choice for anyone developing on novel networks. But then the 2000s roll around, hardware gets way more powerful, SQL databases get easier to use and manage, and the whole industry just shifts gears towards relational models.
I absolutely love this quote because it just perfectly sums up Btrieve's true legacy. A whole generation of developers learned about data management through its way of doing things. They weren't thinking about abstract sets of data. No, they were thinking about the nuts and bolts, keys, indexes, the physical reality of how records were stored. It drilled a performance-first mindset into them.
And that's really the ultimate takeaway here. Btrieve wasn't just some fast product that became obsolete. Not at all. It was a foundational technology. It solved real-world problems, and it shaped how developers approach data access for almost 2 decades. It represents this whole other branch in the tree of database history, a branch that valued directness and raw efficiency above everything else.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Btrieve was one of these invisible engines, and believe it or not, there are some systems still running on it today. For real. So it makes you wonder, right? How many other silent workhorses, written decades ago, are still quietly humming away on a server room somewhere, powering critical parts of our modern world?